One of the reasons I respect Paul Manafort so much is he went through that trial. You know, they make up stories. People make up stories. This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers.
Are you considering pardoning Paul Manafort?
I have great respect for what he's done in terms of what he's gone through. I would say what he did, some of the charges they threw against him, every consultant, every lobbyist in Washington probably does.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, it has been an action-packed news cycle just in the last 24 hours. A tropical storm that's still dumping heavy rain on the Carolinas and has claimed 7 lives. We'll have a live report on the storm a little later in the show. And what could turn out to be Donald Trump's worst week ever. Though at this point, who can tell? Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh is facing an allegation of sexual misconduct from when he was in high school. Vanity Fair reports that people close to Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen say he's talking to special counsel Robert Mueller's team. And a development Donald Trump did not seem to see coming in the Russia investigation. His former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, is now cooperating with Robert Mueller. Manafort pleaded guilty yesterday to 2 criminal charges filed in Washington, D.C., and admitted his guilt to 10 charges in his Virginia case. According to his plea agreement, Manafort must cooperate fully with the government in any and all matters as to what the government deems the cooperation relevant. That means that he has to meet with investigators without a lawyer. He has to turn over documents, testify in court, and he won't even be sentenced until Mueller is satisfied. So Mueller has nabbed what may be his biggest fish yet because of what Manafort could share on key questions in the investigation. Did the Trump campaign, for instance, get a heads up about the Russian hack of Democrats in the Clinton campaign? Did Trump know about the infamous Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer, which Manafort attended along with Trump's son and his son-in-law? And what do Manafort's other ties to Russia and Ukraine have to do with the period of time when he ran the Trump campaign? Joining me now, MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, Elie Mystal, editor of AboveTheLaw.com, former State Department senior advisor Nayyera Haq, and professor of law at Georgetown Law School, Paul Butler. Thank you all for being here. Danny, I'll come right to you on this for the answers to some of those questions. How significant is it? Because I think producers and I have been sort of going back and forth on which of these 2 cooperators could be more detrimental to Donald Trump, between Michael Cohen, who's known the Trump family a long time, and Paul Manafort. For some reason, Paul Manafort felt especially significant this week. Is that legitimate? Paul
Manafort is more significant to the overall Russia investigation that the Mueller team is engaged in. Michael Cohen is more dangerous to Donald Trump because in open court, Michael Cohen referenced essentially an unindicted co-conspirator in the form of the president, and Michael Cohen's plea answered the question, does anybody really care about campaign finance crimes? And the answer is, they definitely do. But Paul Manafort, as it relates to Russia, Paul Manafort is and was Mr. Russia. So even if he doesn't have information directly relevant to the president, he may equally have information about Russians, Ukrainians, anybody in Europe that Mueller cares about.
And anybody in Europe that Mueller cares about, you said Russians and Ukrainians. One of the things we know about Paul Manafort's time at running the Trump campaign is that he was the campaign chairman at the time that the Republican National Committee took place, and the platform, the only change that was requested by the Trump side was to change that platform in the Ukraine plank. This is actually cut 6 for my producer. Sorry, I switched my plan here. Manafort joins the Trump campaign in March. By May, he's promoted to chairman and chief strategist, mainly to help with the convention. In June, Manafort, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, and Don Jr. they meet with this Russian lawyer in Trump Tower. July, Manafort then offers private briefings on the status of the election to a Russian billionaire. RNC platform change happens in July. Trump says, Russia, if you're listening, and then thereafter their hacking continues, or the releases continue, and then he resigns in August. That period of time, how much culpability do you think that means? And are we now at conspiracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to call Clarissa because we found another witch, I think, right? Look, Manafort's significant exactly for why you say. We all know the quid. Manafort can tell us the pro quo, right? What did Russia want? We know what Trump wanted. He wanted to be president. He got to be president. Yay! What did Russia want in exchange?
Right.
Was it enough for them to just say, just be racist and incompetent, and that'll be enough for us, and we'll call it even? Maybe. But maybe they wanted specific things, as you just laid out, and Manafort's going to be the one who knows exactly what Russia wanted, exactly what Russia got. And if he gave them stuff, and Trump knew that he was giving them stuff, that should be enough. That should be enough. That should make the conspiracy. We know what Trump wanted. We know what Trump got. We know what Russia wanted. We know what Russia got. That's the four corners. We should be there.
Yeah, and Naira, I mean, the point is that Manafort, you know, he's had a lot of clients that were bad guys. He's represented the Congo when the Democratic Republic of Congo when Mobutu was still in power. He's represented some pretty tough customers, but he was very much involved in that change of government in Ukraine to a more pro-Russian government for a while, and a sort of very sketchy election. And so is that really, in your view, where the danger for him lies, or the danger for Trump lies, that he is the guy that had these direct ties to this pro-Russian government in Ukraine, and that it just so happens that Ukraine plank gets changed?
Right, so let's look back 2 years before we all know about what happened at the Republican National Convention and the political season. Both Donald Trump and Paul Manafort had extensive ties to Russia, but we don't know necessarily what the money trail connection is, right? Paul Manafort, now we know, was a lobbyist for the Ukraine, the government that essentially allowed half of its country to be invaded by Russia, taken over by Russia. That was a huge international crisis that Paul Manafort was on the wrong side of. We know that Donald Trump at that time had been looking for money and seeking money from Russian oligarchs connected to Putin. We don't know how much or where or when. So it's actually the retroactive information of how Putin and Donald Trump really connect to each other through the campaign chairman. I mean, this is not a small, low-level fish in Donald Trump's orbit. There is nobody higher in Donald Trump's campaign than his campaign chairman, who ostensibly was guiding him with the same values he used to guide the Russians to victory in the Ukraine.
Yeah, and you know, Paul Butler, it does seem that Paul Manafort was holding out for quite some time, right? He has two separate trials. In one of them, there was a mistrial on some of the counts. He's now had to say, I did all those things, by the way. Even the stuff that resulted in a mistrial, I did all of that. He did to plead to everything. But it seemed that what he was holding out for was a pardon. Does it surprise you, given the fact that per Vox, the dangerous words that could come out of his mouth are Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr., that Trump didn't pardon him?
You know, well, what Trump said, or Giuliani said on behalf of Trump, is that any pardons the president issues will be after the investigation. And now it's too late. So Manafort had a tough choice to make. Should he rely on the word of Trump, the presumed word of Trump? Maybe he'll get a pardon. Well, people who rely on Trump's word don't end up doing so well. The other concern was that if he went to trial in the District of Columbia, he would owe hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on top of the money that he already owes. So he's getting a pretty good deal. He was looking, if he was convicted in D.C., as he almost certainly would have been, at 20 years in prison. Now, if he offers substantial cooperation, he's likely to do about 10 years, maybe less. And for a 69-year-old man, that's a big difference. But you're absolutely right. Manafort was the big get. A lot of resources, 11 months, but finally, Mueller broke Manafort.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea is, I'm presuming, I'm a layperson, I'm not a lawyer, that you give up somebody higher than yourself to get these deals. And the only people higher up the food chain than Paul Manafort were Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and Donald Trump. So is it presumable that he's already told didn't he have to tell the court and tell the Mueller team everything that he's got in advance of getting the pardon?
That is an absolute condition of any plea agreement and cooperation agreement, is that when he came forward in the proffer, he had to dazzle the prosecutors enough to believe that the information he had was reliable and that it went up the chain of command. But I caution everybody, yes, it is very possible that it's Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, but it's equally possible it's those other folks that are part of the Russia investigation. Russians.
Right.
So it could relate to those people as well, which would be very interesting if Manafort ultimately has information that isn't damaging to the Americans that are above him, Kushner et al., that he really has information damaging only to Russians. Does he then still appear loyal to President Trump and keep the possibility open for a pardon. I don't think we can rule that out because if anybody knows Russians, Manafort knows Russians.
Right. You know, let's play Alan Dershowitz a little bit. I'm going to come back to you on this, Ellie, because I'm wondering what the value of a pardon is at this point. If he's already told what he knows, and whatever he's told is already damaging enough that they were willing to give him a deal. This is even Alan Dershowitz, who's been very defensive of Donald Trump throughout and been very protective. Well, he says he's not doing it to protect Donald Trump, but he's been very defensive of him. This is what Alan Dershowitz said on MSNBC on Friday.
Well, of course they should be. There's nothing that he can testify to that would probably lend weight to impeachment because he didn't really have close contact with President Trump while he was president, but he did have contact during the campaign. Tough question whether or not alleged crimes committed to get somebody elected president is an impeachable offense or not. We don't know the answer to that. I think he was perhaps hoping for a pardon, and then the question comes up, did the president act too late? If he was going to pardon, he'd have been much better off pardoning early rather than waiting until he's already cooperated.
Feel free to answer either of those questions. Can you commit crimes to become president? It's not impeachable, and is it too late to pardon him?
I can't believe that the president has lost his free lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. Look, Alan Dershowitz doesn't know. He doesn't know what Manafort knows, and him saying, like, well, it's probably not impeached. He doesn't know anything. He's not there. He wasn't there, all right? So, yes, if Manafort knows that, again, if Manafort knows that Trump gave Russians something in exchange for their help to rig the election, which we now kind of know to be a fact, that would be an impeachable offense. What is an impeachable offense? It's whatever the Senate and Congress thinks is an impeachable offense. So Alan Dershowitz saying there's no, that's just not credible. Okay. Now again, how whether or not Manafort has anything that's going to change the mind of Lindsey Graham?
No.
Who knows?
Clearly not. Yeah, let's go to another, because, you know, Paul Butler, the track record here right now for Bob Mueller is pretty darn good. Let's put up his track record. Paul Manafort convicted. Michael Flynn pleaded guilty. George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty. Rick Gates pleaded guilty. Alex Van der Swan pleaded guilty. Very short sentence, but pleaded guilty. Richard Pinedo pleaded guilty. Konstantin Klimnik indicted. 13 Russian nationals indicted. 12 Russian. So you see that he's doing pretty well. And I wonder.
He's a relentless prosecutor, Joy. As you noted at the beginning, there were 11 or 10 hung counts in the Virginia case that the Virginia jury couldn't agree on. That case was kind of over, but Mueller yesterday in court made Manafort say those 10 things that the jury couldn't agree on, yeah, I committed those crimes as well. He is a relentless prosecutor. All he does is win. So now Manafort's folded like Cohen before him. Everyone in his sights, Mueller gets, and that cannot be good news for the President of the United States.
What is good, Nair Hawk, news for the people of the United States is that Mueller is also bringing in the cash. I mean, he has now secured for the United States something of over $40 million in assets due to asset forfeiture and seizure that now goes right in the coffers. So Donald Trump has lost one of his arguments that he's made, which is that the Mueller probe is costing too much money.
Well, and actually, that he's brought in more with forfeiture than the actual investigation even costs. Actually, it may even be more than double or triple. And what we're seeing, I'm so glad that you mentioned the money trail, Joy, because that's the piece that's really been missing from public view. We know there's documents. We know Donald Trump has tax returns that the public hasn't seen. We know he has a lot of debt. He's been bankrupt several times. And we know that Paul Manafort was making money off of Russian election meddling, literally making money off of the thing that the Russians have done to the United States and attacked our government. And now Paul Manafort is pled guilty to conspiracy against the United States. So you have a campaign chairman who is indicating that the President of the United States is directly connected to a conspiracy against the United States.
I want to poll the attorneys on the panel and just go around the horn. I'm going to start with you, Paul Butler, on the question that Alan Dershowitz raised, which struck me as a strange question, where he said we don't know whether crimes someone committed to get elected president are actually impeachable. What do you make of that question? Do you have an answer to that, Paul?
Yeah, I think my former professor of criminal law, Alan Dershowitz, is wrong. What the Constitution says is high crimes and misdemeanors. So if something came out about a president, let's say a worst-case scenario that he or she committed a murder before she was in office, and that murder was uncovered, could that really be irrelevant to the Congress? Should that person remain in office? Of course not. High crimes and misdemeanors whenever they occur, are game for impeachment.
Danny?
Not so fast, Paul Butler. Spoken exactly like a former federal prosecutor. And, you know, when you give the example of someone who, imagine a president committed a murder before he was elected. Well, that happened. Andrew Jackson killed a man in a duel. Everybody knew about it, and yet he was unimpeachable. It is still an open question, and it might not be the case that an official is impeachable for pre-office activities. There is scant history of this, and I will admit the academia on it could go either way.
Yeah.
Reasonable minds could differ, but it is not a sure thing that somebody can be impeached for pre-office activities, and it's just an open question. And the fact that someone committed a crime as egregious as murder does not automatically qualify as an impeachable offense, because guess what? It hasn't in the past.
Oh, I think Andrew Jackson did a lot of stuff that he could not get away with in 2018. All right, so I don't think the Andrew Jackson precedent is correct. I think
it's a killing. It's murder.
Yeah, he's Andrew Jackson. He was a genocidal maniac. I don't think he get elected in 2018.
And a duel wasn't considered murder back then. I don't think a duel was considered murder.
That's actually correct. It was not considered the same kind of crime as it would be straight up killing, which shows you how far we've come. But it was a crime that was known to everybody at the time it was committed.
Yeah.
And like I said, open question if it's pre-office activity.
Well, how far we've come, but we have now a guy who reveres Andrew Jackson as president. But I'll give you the last word, Ellie.
I think Alan Dershowitz's argument is bollocks.
Succinctly wrapped up. My panel staying with me. Loyal, member of Donald Trump's inner circle, previously referred to as Trump's pit bull and fixer, may soon become a bigger headache for Trump than he already is. Just hours after news broke Friday that former Trump associate Paul Manafort will be cooperating with special counsel Robert Mueller, which we just discussed, Vanity Fair reported that it's common knowledge among friends of Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, that he, too, has been in contact with the special counsel. Danny Ceballos, Elie Mystal, Paul Butler back with me, my legal eagles. All right, let's continue our debate about how hot the water is getting for Donald Trump. Now, we had this little back and forth, Danny, over whether or not Manafort was more dangerous to Trump than Cohen. And what you said is that Cohen is more dangerous to Trump himself.
That's correct. Yeah, Cohen's more dangerous to Trump because he stood in open court and essentially admitted to a crime that he participated in with a person that was essentially a candidate for office, and we all know who that was.
Right.
And it was something that up until that moment, until he pleaded, there was doubt in the minds of many as to whether or not the government, technically this was a crime, but would they really care about it? And now we know they care about election crimes. And Cohen named somebody else, being the president essentially, as complicit or at least involved or a co-conspirator in that crime. Part two of Cohen being more dangerous is that he's Trump's personal lawyer. He's known him forever. He taped him as a lawyer, which is something that is just unthinkable to me. But he taped his client. He knows everything about Trump. Manafort, you could make an argument that he doesn't know as much about Trump. He only really knew him for a period of months. I can't believe it. I'm sounding like Trump now, making the same argument. But he did, you know, he didn't know him nearly as well as Michael Cohen did. So if you're playing the odds and you want to guess who's the most dangerous to Trump, not necessarily most beneficial to Mueller, then it has to be Cohen.
Yeah, and more dangerous to Trump and to his kids, because he shepherded them to Moscow to build Trump Tower projects and everything.
Yeah, I generally agree with Tanny because Cohen knows about the PP tape, right? Like if that's real, Cohen's the one who knows about it.
Right.
And that's actually how Cohen, and again, I generally agree with Tanny that Cohen's more dangerous to Trump personally. But that's how Cohen gets wrapped back into the Russia thing, because somebody maybe went to Prague to maybe talk to the Russians about
He says he didn't go.
He says it. Lanny Davis says he didn't go, but that was, you know, now that Cohen's pled guilty, what does Cohen, maybe he went to Germany, maybe it wasn't, but like, who talked to who about the PP tape? That's kind of where Cohen shows up, and if he knows something about that, I mean, it's gross, but it's like that's the connection back into Russia.
Yeah, we just never want to see it. Let's listen to Lanny Davis on Rachel Maddow on August 21st talking about what Cohen knows.
I can tell you that Mr. Cohen has knowledge on certain subjects that should be of interest to the special counsel and is more than happy to tell the special counsel all that he knows.
Paul Butler, your view on what it is that he could know, because normally these campaign finance violation crimes they don't result, right, in a lot of jail time. I don't even think they're prosecuted that often, but they care now, but they obviously care because they think he might have something to tell them.
Yeah, normally you wouldn't go to jail for a campaign violation unless there's proof of some kind of malicious intent. You know you're doing the wrong thing. And it could be that Michael Cohen has evidence to send President Trump to jail after he leaves office just on that. But, Joy, he's kind of being double-teamed, President Trump is, by the Southern District investigation, which does seem to be focused on campaign financing, and the Mueller investigation. And so we don't know what exposure Cohen has with regard to collusion, but Robert Mueller already knows. So the fact that he is talking to Cohen means that he thinks Cohen might have something that would help him with his own investigation. This is Trump's famous fixer. This is the guy who's been with Trump for 10 years. This is the guy who's made tape recordings of Trump. So he may very well have the goods on obstruction of justice and collusion, as well as these other campaign financing violations.
And he's someone who's been unfailingly loyal to Trump, and that Trump, for all of the reporting, has been really crappy to, like sort of demeaning him and treating him poorly. It's the kind of person you don't want to be mean to.
He's burned.
Let's play a little bit of Cohen back in 2011 when he was still on Trump's team.
If there's an issue that relates to Mr. Trump that is of concern to him, it's of course concern to me. And I will use my legal skills within which to protect Mr. Trump to the best of my ability.
You know, nothing shocks me about Donald Trump at this point, usually. But the idea that that's the guy that you would be cruel to,
yeah,
it just seems so short-sighted.
Well, I mean, you're kind of more philosophical now. It just goes to his cruelty. Like, he can't help himself at some level. Because it's not smart to be mean to this man, this loyal, reek-like servant that knows all your business,
yeah,
and all your children's business. It's not a good look. And again, we don't know when you're in that loyal servant role. We don't really know how much you know. We don't know whether or not you were really involved, and so it's hard to know what he might really have on Trump.
Yeah.
But certainly, Trump's treatment of him has inspired Cohen to tell whatever he knows.
Yeah, it's a sort of mob loyalty, right? I mean, Donald Trump, you know, this is a guy who's lost everything, who's facing personal bankruptcy, who's facing, you know, he's lost his business, he's lost his ability to travel. He can only go to Florida, D.C., and New York. He can't go anywhere. He's facing jail time. And Emily Jane Fox has a great report out now, her latest reporting, that he's saying, why am I facing all the consequences? Donald Trump has faced no consequences at all.
Even with the most loyal defendants who think they adhere to omerta and think they're gangster style, when they are faced with the full force of the U.S. government prosecuting them, after a while, it's a war of attrition. Even the Michael Cohens of this world who swear loyalty oaths to the president or anybody else, they break down. And Paul Butler will tell you this. He's probably done it himself to defendants, but this is how it works. And you see, the one person who up until this week stood fast and did not take a deal was Paul Manafort, which was a clear signal to Trump, who values loyalty. Yeah. If you're going to pardon anyone, all right, forget these other schmoes. Pardon me. Yeah. I'm the one that has stayed fast. I've held my ground. I am not a snitch until this week, which leads me to believe he may still not be a snitch as to Trump. It may be people close to Trump, or it might be Russians, but he may still be holding out for the possibility of
and
a
you know, and Joy, to Danny's point, I have, as a prosecutor, stood up in court many times and taken guilty pleas. And there's this part where you say what the evidence would have proven if you'd gone to trial. There was an extraordinary moment yesterday during Manafort's guilty plea where the prosecutor, Andrew Weitzman, Mueller's deputy, got up and said, this is what we would have proven about Manafort if we'd gone to trial. And Joy, he talked for 40 minutes.
Wow.
And then the judge said, that's got to be a record. I never heard that kind of statement of proof in a guilty plea. Mr. Manafort, did you do it? And Mr. Manafort said, yes, I did.
Wow, that's amazing. Can we put up all of the people who are now saying they're either cooperating right now or willing to cooperate with Robert Mueller? There it is. And it's, you know, it's pretty much the full Monty, right? They've got his former national security advisor there. They've got Rick Gates, who was Paul Manafort's deputy, Manafort himself. I think a lot more crucially, Ellie, in a lot of ways, is Alan Weisselberg, who we've been told a lot of times on this set. You know, Tim O'Brien and others who really know Trump and have reported on him. This guy's got all the goods. He's the CFO of the Trump Organization. investigation. This feels like that it's not just about Russia. This is about Trump's businesses as well.
At this point, it's easier to talk about who hasn't been charged, who hasn't been convicted, and who hasn't flipped, right? And if you look at who hasn't been, the only people left on that list have Trump in their last name or are married to Trump.
Yeah.
That really tells you where all of this is facing, right? All of this is focusing. We're closing the circle and closing the circle and closing the circle, and we're now honing in on the core family.
Yeah.
To use something that I would say to my kid, the cheese stands alone now. And that's got to be super problematic if you're Donald.
Lightning round, who should be the most worried?
Don Jr. still.
Most worried, Danny?
Yeah, Don Jr. I actually agree with you, yeah.
Paul Butler, who
Don
should be
Jr.
the most worried about a guy like you coming after them?
Donald Trump Jr.
Everybody agrees. Well, if I'm Donald Trump Jr., I might want to just get a really good lawyer.
He is the weakest link, right?
Ooh,
He's
here
the
we
weakest
go.
link.
I love it. All right. Well, I mean, I love that you went out on that mic drop note. Not that I love that he's the weakest link. Sorry. Danny Zavalos, Ellie and Paul will join us later. Thank you, Danny. Always appreciate you coming in.
My name is Anita F. Hill, and I am a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. It would have been more comfortable to remain silent. It took no initiative to inform anyone. I took no initiative to inform anyone. But when I was asked by a representative of this committee to report my experience, I felt that I had to tell the truth. I could not keep silent.
27 years after Anita Hill came forward to testify that then Supreme Court Justice nominee Clarence Thomas had sexually harassed her, and we know how that turned out. He was confirmed anyway. Another Supreme Court nominee is facing allegations of sexual misconduct, this time made anonymously. In a letter that landed on the desk of United States Senator Dianne Feinstein, a woman alleged Judge Brett Kavanaugh tried to force himself on her while they were in high school in the 1980s. According to the New York Times, citing 3 sources familiar with the letter, and the New Yorker, both of whom published reports on the allegations on Friday. Kavanaugh is denying the allegation, saying in a statement, "I categorically and unequivocally deny this allegation. I did not do this back in high school or at any time." Ellie and Nayera back with me. And joining me now is Karine Jean-Pierre of MoveOn.org. And Karine, there's a lot that's strange here. I want to get into the delay in getting this information Senator Feinstein had since July, according to both the Ronan Farrow Jane Mayer story as well as the New York Times story. She had this information. She held this information. She said it was because she wanted to protect the identity of this accuser and protect her privacy. But is it strange to you that she did not disclose, even to the other Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, anything about this or question him about it even in closed session?
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I can understand protecting women who come forward and their identity and making sure that, you know, like I said, they're protected. But she sat on this for 2 months, as you stated, Joy, and she didn't even bring it up behind closed doors of the sessions that they had with Brett Kavanaugh. She could have brought it up there. She didn't give it to the FBI when she first heard it, and so it is troubling in that way. I think there's things that she could have done a lot sooner before today. But at the end of the day, it should be about these allegations. They're incredibly troubling. This process has been going way too fast. It was, what, less than 60 days after his nomination, he was already starting a hearing. And we should slow this process down. There should not be, violence should not be allowed in society at all, and certainly not at the highest court of our nation. And we need to slow this down, and it should not be about Democrats. It should not be about when it came out. It should be about Brett Kavanaugh, because this is a lifetime appointment.
Absolutely. We start off playing Anita Hill, who was so brave to come forward. Yeah. 3 other women who are willing to stand by her, but memorably, Democratic senators, including former Vice President Joe Biden, did not call those other 3 women who would have backed her up and didn't allow them to be heard. But in this case, Anita Hill, who had to do it all alone back then, she released a statement saying the reluctance of someone to come forward demonstrates that even in the Me Too era, it remains incredibly difficult to report harassment, abuse, or assault by people in power. Given the seriousness of these allegations, the government needs to find a fair and neutral way for complaints to be investigated. The Senate Judiciary Committee Committee should put in place a process that enables anyone with a complaint of this nature to be heard. I have seen firsthand what happens when such a process is weaponized against an accuser, and no one should have to endure that again. And just to make it clear that what this accuser is alleging is serious. It was a long time ago, but this is the Ronan Farrow Jane Mayer version of the story from the New Yorker. And this is the description. It is disturbing. It says the allegation dates back to the early 1980s when Kavanaugh was a high school student and the woman attended a nearby high school. In the letter, the woman alleged that during an encounter at a party, Kavanaugh held her down and that he attempted to force himself on her. She claimed in the letter that Kavanaugh and a classmate of his, both of whom had been drinking, turned up music that was then playing in the room to conceal the sound of her protest, and that Kavanaugh covered her mouth with his hand, but that she was able to free herself. And I should note that, the NBC hasn't confirmed any of this reporting or seen the letter, but, they date back to when he was in high school. I'll turn it over to you, Nair Haq. I mean, it's not surprising that this woman would not want to subject herself to what Anita Hill had to go through. But is it surprising to you that we're only getting this allegation now after the hearings are over?
Oh, I think that Karine mentions a great point. There's so much information about Kavanaugh that's coming out well after the hearings because the process has been so rushed. He's doing a job interview for a lifetime appointment. When people take jobs for 2 years and it takes them longer to interview in a process with any of the big companies in the United States. So it should be slowed down, not least because we are in a very interesting political and moral moment. I mean, the only reason we know about the term sexual harassment is because Anita Hill spoke up about it nearly 20 years ago. The only reason that we are hearing about these allegations in a way that is meaningful is because of that moment that's been created by Me Too. But we need to have the opportunity to understand and figure out what kind of moral character and moral implication this has. Meaning, we all want to have people on the Supreme Court who are of high moral character, but we also want to make sure that women have the opportunity to be heard, and we also want to make sure that nobody's being held accountable for something that was never a conviction. That's going to take more than a minute, and it should not be rushed in a process where next week we suddenly have to make a final judgment on giving this guy a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, and Ellie, I mean, your views on Kavanaugh are very well known, but I want to go back and unpack, because this is a guy who has faced a lot of other allegations, including there are senators who are saying they can't vote for him because they believe he lied to Congress before. There's all sorts of issues. It's still being jammed through. Dianne Feinstein, to stay on this for a moment, she said on Thursday that the individual who came forward strongly requested confidentiality, declined to come forward and press the matter further. She's honored that decision. She says, I have, however, referred the matter to federal investigative authorities. So she's referred it to investigation. She's had it since July. What do you make of this?
She also said later in that statement, oh, I also thought that it was better to focus on the law and not this personal stuff. And that is where she is wrong. Kavanaugh on the law is Republican, just like Neil Gorsuch or Ray Kethledge or whoever else they want to drag up. But it's this character stuff. Kavanaugh is the most ethically challenged Supreme Court nominee we've had since Clarence Thomas. You don't have to believe these allegations necessarily. I don't know the truthfulness of these allegations, but I know Brett Kavanaugh isn't telling the truth. Oh, how can he defend himself? He doesn't know who she is even. He knows who she is. Yeah. He remembers the party. I remember every single girl I passed a note to in chemistry class. Right. All right? He knows who she is. Yeah. And he's not telling the truth about that. He's not telling the truth about his debts. Baseball tickets. Who believes that? Yeah. He's not telling the truth about his gambling. He says he played a dice game for no money. Who believes that? If I roll with my children, we're playing for Skittles. All right? That's completely untrue that he played a dice game for no money. It's completely untrue that he lied to Congress. That's the last thing I just got to in my list. He lied to Congress. This process needs to be stopped. And any Republican who cannot see their moral way clear to say, let's just get another conservative. Yeah. They can pass him in the lame duck. Yeah. If Kavanaugh succeeds, it is a moral failing of the process.
And the process has included, Karine, Republicans who, again, only Dianne Feinstein knew about this letter apparently since July. She didn't even tell other Democrats. However, quick, fast, in a hurry, to the point of whether or not Mr. Kavanaugh does know who this woman is and is familiar with this allegation. Very quickly, a letter was produced, signed by 65 women. Yep. This guy knew 65 women. He went to an all-boys high school, but he knew 65 girls in high school who all produced a letter saying for the entire time we've known Brett Kavanaugh is his behavior honorably, treated women with respect. We strongly believe it's important to convey the information to the committee at this time. How did they come up with 65 women that went to high school with him when he went to an all-boy high school?
They were ready. They were ready, Joy. They were ready. They knew about this. And so they had it at the ready. And like you said, they dropped it just like that. So they knew about this accusation, the accusation of sexual assault before the New Yorker article, clearly. And so they were ready for it, and they released that letter. But here's the thing, Joy. So we know that Brett Kavanaugh lied, right? We know he lied under oath. We know his extreme views on Roe v. Wade, on affirmative action, and now he's being accused of sexual assault. What else do senators need to stop this process? What else do they need? He couldn't be more flawed and more just ethically challenged, and they just refuse to stop this. And why do they? Well, let's think about it. The midterms are coming up. They have nothing else to sell, right? They have Gorsuch, and that's pretty much about it. They can't run on their awful tax cuts. They're trying to take health care away from everybody, and SCOTUS picks actually move their base. Yeah. So that's one reason there. And who knows what the outcome of the midterms might be for them. Yep. So this is completely politics. It's not about the country. It's about their party. It's about giving Donald Trump a win.
Yeah, Ellen.
There's one more thing that Kavanaugh has that the replacement level arch conservative doesn't, right? And that is Kavanaugh's ridiculous theory that everybody in the executive branch works for the president and not the American people. Right. That's the one thing that Gorsuch doesn't have, or Kethledge doesn't have. This belief that Trump cannot be charged or subpoenaed or looked at askance.
One might think it's why he was nominated.
And that's the thing. That's why he's still here.
And that's why he's still. And the thing that, Nayyirah, that's so incredible is the lengths to which Republicans are willing to go to give that to Donald Trump, to immunize him through the Supreme Court, essentially, to put someone on the court that is essentially, you know, it's sort of, you know, seating the jury in a way. And they don't, and they're not. None of this is moving Republicans at all. This is going forward, no matter what is said. Republicans have been coming out giving statements saying, nope, we're going to, Thursday, we're going to have the hearing, we're voting on it, it doesn't matter what comes out. And they're also using this to turn it around on Dianne Feinstein and make a claim, much like what happened in the Roy Moore case, very different, obviously, allegations in Alabama. The Senate case, after Feinstein's announcement, a White House spokesman named Carrie Kupek came out to say about Kavanaugh, not until the eve of the confirmation has Senator Feinstein or anyone raised the specter of new information about it, calling it an 11th hour attempt to delay his confirmation. No, Dianne Feinstein didn't drop this at the 11th hour. The New York Times and the New Yorker intrepid reporters did, because it had become an open secret in Washington.
And that's the unfortunate part of all of this, is that I hope this prompts women to come forward at the time something happens and to be reporting instances of sexual assault and abuse, because if we had a police record here, I think that would make this an even stronger case, open and shut. But the challenge with the people who are actually doing the confirming right now is that they are more interested in executing their agenda, extreme conservative agenda of stacking the judiciary, of passing through eliminating health care and passing through tax cuts that help corporates. They are willing to accept morally flawed candidates, a morally flawed president, and now a morally flawed Supreme Court nominee just to execute their agenda.
Yeah, and you know, we're running out of time, but Karine, you know, what would it mean, you know, to have both Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas, you know, on the court? I mean, just what does that symbolize for the country, given the allegations against them both?
It sends a horrible message to women when you have two people who have been accused of sexual assault, you know, on the highest courts of the land. And it's just really unfortunate, and it should be allowed. It could be stopped. The senators have the power to stop this, and they can. There's no reason to move this as fast as they are. They need to stop this process.
We to clarify, with Clarence Thomas, it was sexual harassment, and with this case, it is an allegation of assault. It's pretty serious, and there'll be two of them on the court. Thank you, Elie Mystal. Thank you, Nayyirah Haq. Karine will be back in our next hour.